Business of the Senate, notice of motion number 1, standing in the name of Senator Di Natale, relating to the disallowance of a therapeutic goods regulation.
Senator Di Natale.
Thank you, Madam Deputy President. I move business of the Senate notice of motion number 1, standing in my name for today. Now, I am moving this disallowance not for the Australian Greens, but for those many, many patients who have life-threatening illnesses, who are undergoing intolerable suffering, patients who may have cancers, who have brain tumours, who have uncontrolled epilepsy, who may have multiple sclerosis and are suffering from debilitating spasms. For those people who are undergoing chemotherapy and have intractable nausea and vomiting, for many of those people who are suffering from excruciating chronic pain, for all of those people who need some level of relief for which traditional or conventional medicines are not helping, and for which medicinal cannabis has been demonstrated scientifically to provide some significant relief. And I'm calling on all sides of the chamber to come together now to show these Australians who have been dealt a cruel blow when it comes to their health, to show those Australians that this parliament respects them enough to allow them the same rights of access to effective medications as they would get any other medication. Now, it's budget week. We've heard a lot from both of the major parties about their level of commitment to health, and I just hope that they aren't hollow words, that what we will see with this disallowance motion is indeed real support for those people who have terminal illnesses and who require the assistance that only medicinal cannabis can provide to them. Now, it should be a no-brainer. It should be a no-brainer. Why? Because all that this disallowance does is restore the existing rights of patients who, by definition, are suffering from a life-threatening condition to access the medicines they need to ease some of their pain smoothly and rapidly. Now, we say that should someone be suffering from a terminal illness, that there is a special scheme that allows them to get medicines into their hands quickly. The disallowance, what it does is it makes two simple changes to the Therapeutic Goods and Other Legislation Amendment Narcotic Drugs Regulation 2016 Act to restore the rights of terminally ill patients to access medicinal cannabis products through Category A of the TGA's Special Access Scheme and through personal importation. Now, let me try and condense that into English. In English, what that means is there is a special category called Category A through the TGA that says if you've got a life-threatening illness, you can actually go to your doctor and your doctor will make sure you get this drug in your hand to help you. It's a special pathway for people with a terminal illness. Now, it also relates to importation. If you are someone who has a terminal illness, you get access to medicinal cannabis while you're travelling overseas, you can actually bring it into Australia. Now, again, we would think that both of those things are no-brainers. We are talking about people who have life-threatening illnesses as determined by their doctor. They still need to go to the doctor to get this medication in their hands. This isn't some pathway that bypasses the medical profession. Indeed, it's through the medical profession that access is made available. The Special Access Scheme of the TGA, it is designed to provide a pathway for Australians to access treatments that might not be registered here in Australia. So if you're somebody who desperately needs to get access to medicinal cannabis, it may not be registered in your state at this time for the condition that you have, you can get that medication through your doctor. Again, I emphasise it's through a doctor. It allows doctors the freedom to prescribe the most appropriate treatments to their patients, even when that treatment is not available in this country. Now, there are two tiers of Special Access Scheme. There's the Category A and Category B, and they've got different levels of regulation associated with them, and it depends a bit on the condition of the patient. So just to stress again, the condition of the patient is strictly defined in the Special Access Scheme. If you're eligible under Category A, the definition for you to be eligible for this scheme is that you are persons who are seriously ill with a condition from which death is reasonably likely to occur within a matter of months, or from which premature death is reasonably likely to occur in the absence of early treatment. Now, again, one would think that's a no-brainer. This government stands up and heralds the progress we've made with medicinal cannabis. They've been dragged there kicking and screaming, it must be said. We Greens drafted private members' legislation. We were assured by the government that if we worked with them, they would provide access to patients. We did that in good faith, so I am hopeful that what they will do now is say that this scheme is available to patients. Why is it that we would have a double standard? Why is it that we would have Category A, which is basically a standard that says if you go to a doctor and there's a drug not available here in Australia, you're suffering from a terminal illness, and the drug's not registered in Australia, you can have it as long as it's not medicinal cannabis. If we don't support this disallowance, that's what we're saying. We are saying to patients, you've got a terminal illness, you can't get access to your drug, we know it's going to help you, you can get it, bring it here to Australia, but just make sure it's not medicinal cannabis. Well, you're either serious about this stuff or you're not. You either recognise that medicinal cannabis is evidence-based treatment for a range of conditions and you make it available to people for those conditions. So for Australians, the Special Access Scheme allows their doctor to prescribe them treatments that they believe will be of benefit to ease their suffering and to do so based on the recognition that time is of the essence. I mean, we've got people here who might be, for example, let's talk about some of the stories here. Let's talk about Dan Haslam. Dan Haslam was a young man who suffered from a very severe form of cancer. He was somebody who underwent. He was 21 years old, I think. 21. This is a young man who's 21 years old who suffers from who gets cancer. He's undergoing chemotherapy and finds he can't tolerate it. He spends days afterwards, head down in a bucket, vomiting because of the severe nausea associated with the drugs that he's taking. Tries all the drugs that are there, the conventional drugs that are used to treat nausea. Someone suggests medicinal cannabis, gets rapid relief from that drug. Now, what are we saying to somebody who might be in that position, who can't access the drug? They should not be able to access medicinal cannabis through the Category A scheme. I just simply don't believe that anybody would think that that was appropriate. Look, I think sometimes it's too easy here in this chamber to forget that the decisions we make have a material impact on the lives of everyday people. Let me tell you about Lindsay, an 18-year-old boy from Queensland. He's got refractory epilepsy. That means it's epilepsy that just doesn't respond to many of the different drugs that are given, some of which make people very drowsy, some of which have a whole range of other side effects. Along with his epilepsy, he's got chronic pain and nausea as a result of a brain tumour. Now, Lindsay was the first Australian patient approved for medicinal cannabis in Australia when it was still Schedule 9, that is, when it wasn't available through a regulated TGA process. He also got a serious benefit from his nausea. He actually got some appetite. Of course, we know that many of the people who have cancer lose their appetite, they lose weight, and that contributes to the downward spiral. So the medicinal cannabis helped his nausea and his appetite. He got some strength back. But the applications for him to get the drug have taken months and months. 19 months in the first instance to get access to medicinal cannabis. And even when the supply is patchy and he has periods of poor health, he simply just can't get access to the drugs he needs. Lindsay and his courageous mother, Lanai, have been fighting for years, not just with the tremendously challenging condition of his health because of his brain tumour, but also with our punitive, opaque and unnecessarily overburdened regulatory system. Now, here we have the coalition who says it wants to cut red tape. Well, here is red tape you should be prepared to get the chainsaw out and rip to shreds, because this is red tape that is stopping a medication that relieves suffering from people getting into the hands of those people who need it. I would say to you, you cannot, should not, in all good faith, vote against this disallowance motion, which would make sure that people like Lindsay are able to access the drug when they need it. Or like Jason, who was 40 when he died last month from his brain tumour. He was diagnosed in 1986. He went through chemotherapy, surgery and radiation. He suffered severe brain damage and was cared for dutifully by his mother, Janelle, until his death. He couldn't complete his chemo because his weight dropped to 20 kilograms. This is an adult. Medicinal cannabis gave him relief so that he got his appetite back and he could eat a little. It relieved some of his pain. It just gave him some quality of life in his final years. But Jason died having to access medicinal cannabis illegally because the pathways to access it were far too onerous, far too difficult. To use the language of the government, there was far too much red tape. His mother said that after his death, that her only regret was not allowing him to use medicinal cannabis in her home because, in her words, she was dead set opposed to illicit drugs. Yet she saw the relief these treatments gave her son and said she would defend his use to anyone. So access through Category A meant that people like Jason, indeed people like Lindsay, could go and see their doctor, and if they weren't able to get medicinal cannabis through the pathways approved by this government, indeed by state jurisdictions, there is a mechanism for those people suffering from a terminal illness to be able to get the drug in their hands when they need it. So I can't understand how any of my fellow senators here in this place would not be moved by these stories and can't see that their opposition to this simple change would improve the lives of those dying Australians. Now, I understand Senator Hinch wants to say a few words, so I'll truncate my speech so that he has the opportunity to do so. But let me just end with the words of one of the advocates of medicinal cannabis, someone called Lanai, an advocate and mother to Lindsay, who asked me to pass on this message to you. And this is what she said. In the life of a patient with a life-threatening illness, like my son Lindsay, one day, waiting for a medicine is a day too long. Lindsay has been waiting now since the start of this year and he's suffering seizures again. If this was your child, would you want to wait? Or would you think that this government can act now and make sure that patients like Lindsay can get the drug when they need it? So I'm calling on all members of this chamber to do the right thing, to stand up for Australian patients and to make sure that today you do something that is good and something that is decent.